Well, hello, this is John Reed, Titanomica. I'm in an unfamiliar location, Philadelphia. Don't get that very much, but I got one of my favorite usual suspects, Brian Sommer. How we doing?
I'm doing just fine. Yes, we are both here in Philadelphia at the Sofitel, and hopefully this room will stay quiet while we're doing this. There won't be a bunch of hotel people coming in or out.
Indeed, this is looming as a breakdown area, and breakdowns and podcasts don't go together. But we are gathered here, Brian, because before you and I completely go off into ventures on jets and tarmacs, we want to make sense of what happened at the Unit4 Analyst Day. Unit4 is a vendor that has brought a lot of interesting thinking to cloud ERP over the last number of years, but we haven't had an Analyst Day in a few years. So here we are to make sense of it. One really cool thing that I want to give Unit4 props for right away is there was no NDA content this entire day, which is incredibly rare. So you and I don't have to spend any time thinking about, oh crap, can I say this in the podcast? And we can bring this insights to you, the people. So let's try to get some trenchant insights, shall we, Brian?
Trenchant?
Yeah.
Man, you're reaching for the
Hey, man.
thesaurus already. I mean, this is
Well, it's the buzzword generator, right? Well, we'll talk about that at the end.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah. So what are your impressions? You've been tracking this company for a long time. How would you describe why audience should pay attention to this company? What are they about?
Well, first of all, the Aggresso products have been around for eons. I knew them when they had a big presence in the Netherlands, of all places. They also were related for a time with Coda software, and piece of Coda became Financial Force, which then became Certinia. I mean, so I guess what I'm establishing is I'm doing one of those Dr. Henry Gates genealogy TV shows here. What are your software roots? But they've been around a while, and Aggresso was interesting because it was a solution that allowed all kinds of dynamic flexibility that you could completely recast your financials, just by electing to do so, and it could rebuild stuff for you. It's pretty slick. Anyway, through some ownership changes, whatever, and leadership changes, the company has altered quite a bit over the years. They've got an ERP suite, and they sell predominantly to four main verticals. And just off the top of my head, I believe they're the professional services, public sector, higher education, and
Nonprofit would be the fourth. Nonprofit is
and
the
nonprofits.
fourth. Yep.
Yes, I can't believe I was missing that one. But anyway, I'm doing this off the top of my head. Anyway, I liked. They've had longstanding customers in all of those sectors. They sell well in those sectors. That's why they're kind of relevant. And we know their CEO, Mike Ettling, very well from other companies he's been involved with over the years.
Just a couple quick stats, 450 million revenue. I can't remember in my notes. I think that might be euros, though. I'm pretty sure from the slide. And 15% growth AR. So, but one interesting thing about Unit4 is for quite some time, they were pushing the self-driving ERP slogan, which at the time appeared a little bit ahead of its time. Now that slogan has been revived for the new Unit4 missions. And I have some pros and cons with that slogan, but there's interesting stuff there around Ettling's comments on RPA. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Mike made a comment about how he didn't believe that vendors should have, or customers should have to buy separate ERP and RPA, robotic process automation tools. And I've kind of liked some of the RPA tools. They've been a darling for companies like in the insurance industry and the governmental sector. Those are two in particular that really loved RPA. And what it would do is you could set up rules and think of it as almost like switches on a manufacturing line. It would detect something new on an item, and then boom, it was shunted to one direction or another. And the same thing happens on workflows. You could build in all kinds of controls, governance, and oversight and everything else as transactions are coming through. Mike's correct that these shouldn't be two different products because, frankly, what we know is ERP is just being relegated to becoming a transaction engine for the most part and a storage space for validated process transactions. And where we really ought to be going is, we need to be thinking that RPA really is one of the earlier big mass rollouts of an artificial intelligence technology. It was machine learning is what it was, and it knew how to move stuff around for you, and it improved process efficiency and productivity quite nicely.
I want to add to that briefly, which is that folks want a little more background on my take on this. I've written about this on Diginomica recently, but one of the big misconceptions that's driving me crazy about generative AI is this ludicrous notion that generative AI is going to be good at the kinds of things RPA is good for, therefore RPA is legacy. In fact, that's crap. It doesn't validate with what Gen AI is good for at all. Gen AI is a probabilistic technology that is really good at engaging users. It's really good at dealing with unstructured data as well as structured data. So there's a lot of cool things you can potentially do, but what it's not going to do is run your enterprise processes. That's not what it's for. The way Etling described it in the Unit 4 approach to AI is RPA is the hook. You hook that into your Gen AI, so you can invoke those automations. So all that work they've done on the RPA-based automations puts them in a position to layer the generative AI tooling on top of that. So I think it's a really important point versus just, we're going to replace all our RPA. That's not what people are going to do.
So let me give the listeners, I guess, a really good example of the differences. With RPA, you actually go in and you define it could be ranges, it could be numerical values, whatever.
It's primarily rules-based.
It's rules.
Yeah.
You're setting up rules and you're also setting up controls. If the invoice exceeds $10,000, it goes to a different workflow approval process. So these are actually great things to have, particularly if you're in accounting, because you want to be able to have your auditors see that you've got these documented controls, processes, and so forth. That's the RPA side of machine learning and machine processing. The generative stuff, where that comes in is, okay, so some anomalous transaction got sent to a review box by RPA. Now, an end user has to look at this, and generative AI would be really good in helping this person understand, hey, John, here are the rules we have in this company. So it's stating what the rules are. It states what other kind of approvals might be necessary, but could possibly look at things like, hey, this particular vendor always submits invoices between like $100 and $500, and this one's coming in at $10,000. Are you really sure this is correct?
Right.
And it's serving up context, I guess, to help a user, whereas the RPA is just figuring out, if you will, what's anomalous.
And the generative AI solution could also perhaps recommend a field that isn't normally filled out that needs to be, or it could even offer, it could offer to send this back to a customer and create an email template, or even if you're confident in it, fire it off. But the point is, the technologies work well together, which is contrary to a lot of the hype that we're hearing right now of that's a legacy RPA is done and gone. It's past technology. Now we're on to generative. It's and this is what we hear when people are we're rebuilding our ERP with Gen AI. It's why would you do that? Just use what you have and then figure out how to make it more quote unquote intelligent. So anyway, we've gone far enough down that path. So I want to talk about something a little controversial that Unit 4 is doing with end of maintenance. But before I go there, I did want to mention one thing that I think they excelled in that I didn't see a lot this fall. This fall, I saw a whole lot about, you have a new AI teammate on your team. It was all about your AI teammate or your co-pilot. Mm-hmm. And yes, Unit 4 has an announcement there too, which we'll get to. But I liked how Unit 4 really emphasized the human side of collaboration, and as part of their part of what they mean by self-driving ERP is so-called headless ERP. So the idea being work in the environment you want to. So they had a lot of Teams-based stuff, which I thought was cool as far as, you don't have to log into your ERP system to do that. So they had a lot of really good demos, I think, that showed humans collaborating with each other in the context they're comfortable with without having to navigate screens and then email your colleague about a question you have about some screen. So anyway, I thought that was cool. But
Yeah, and for the listeners, they were showing examples where one user's doing everything on her cell phone, and the let's call it the expert super user is actually working on some other stuff, some approval thing that was kind of hinky. He's working on it on his laptop, and they're also working through some collaboration stuff. And it's figuring out and find out all this stuff to the point where you don't know where the data, where the Unit4 ERPX kind of application is that you're looking at, because it may be, it's the thing feeding the mobile screens and the mobile UX. It's the thing feeding a lot of some of the AI kind of stuff. And which is really kind of nice because we're finally moving away from those old school fixed command line kind of user or tab lines that we're so used to seeing in so many UXs.
One of the things we didn't get into today that I would have liked to get into is I still, believe that a lot of the old school super users are going to want their screens and are going to keep wanting to use them. But I think it's such a huge deal with new users in the system and casual users and making it easy for those folks. So you talk a lot about the talent wars. I don't think you can compete in the talent wars if you're going to ask young professionals to navigate old school ERP green screens, and they might as well be green for how easy they are to navigate, right? So,
yeah, since I'm old enough to have kids in the workforce, I get earfuls about how bad old school screens are, UXs are, and I don't ask for the feedback; they just volunteer it for me.
And I think it's a factor in recruiting and hiring and retention. Anyway, so let's talk about this migration deadline though, because so Unit4’s go-to release is called ERPX, and that's their multi-tenant public cloud release, and that's where the self-driving ERP is sort of built upon. If you follow their lingo, 95% of new deals go into ERPX, but they still have a substantial amount of folks. I don't have the exact percentage right in front of me. I think it's something like 40%, something. It's less than half, but there's still a good chunk of customers that haven't moved, and they're still on older versions. And Unit4 also has a transitional release called CR, but a lot of the older school folks are on ERP 7. So they initiated, I think, last October an announcement that by the end of this calendar year, you gotta move. But it's not that simple. They've actually been a little more flexible in certain ways. But when I first read it, I was like, oh my God, this is a big mistake. This is the heavy hand of forced marched upgrades. But I think we heard a more nuanced version of that today. So what are your thoughts?
Well, to be clear, the end of life deal kind of comes up closer to the end of 2026.
Yeah. And it's just that you have to, by the beginning of this year, you have to have had some discussion with them, I think, is the deal.
Yeah, they want some kind of signal because they can't absorb all of the services impact or whatever that might be required if a huge number want to make a change all at once. And it gets worse because with so many of them probably using financial modules, a bunch of them might want to convert all of a sudden, all at one time, into December, 1st of January, because their fiscal and calendar years align. So there's that. But you're right. This was this was the furthest away from a heavy-handed approach you could get. But I wouldn't want to mislead a listener into thinking, oh, well, if they extend it to 2026, they'll probably extend it to 2050 or something. No. There's a finite limit as to how far they're going to do it. And what this really means is you at least need to get over to the CR version of the product because then you'll still be able to get a number of the different technical advancements
But it still allows customizations and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you want to use some of the advanced technologies, those will only be available in the cloud versions of the products, and that includes almost all their AI functionality.
Yeah.
So, yes, there is change afoot, and they're not the first vendor that's having to deal with this kind of issue or has, put these kind of end-of-life statements out there. My suggestion is if you're one of the customers, you need to get on the phone and have a conversation with your account exec and find out kind of where are we and what do we have to do? What do I need to budget for so that you're ready for it? And frankly, I don't know what to tell some folks other than unless you customize the living daylights out of the solution in a way that even Unit4’s mother couldn't identify it as one of her own offspring, you need to move if you're ever going to take advantage of some of the new advanced capabilities because they need access to vast amounts of data. Some of the data may not be in the Unit4 system, but it's going to be the things that power the AI tools and other capabilities.
Well, and this was interesting too, because I think it warrants a little bit of awareness that because they're Unit4, because of their public sector business in particular, they do have around, I think they said 12%, it was like 12 or 13% of companies that simply cannot move to the cloud for regulatory reasons
Right.
in their country of origin. And so those customers receive an exception. But we had some interesting talks with Mike Etling, and he has talked about this publicly before in articles too, around conversation with customers around that are heavily customized. And I asked him today, I said, what about these cloud benefits? It's kind of a cliche. So have you articulated what these benefits were? And he shared an anecdote of a customer where once he kind of got through talking the customer through what they can actually do in the cloud, that they're now doing kind of manually stitched together and all that stuff, the customer totally sees the business value proposition differently. And so I think this happens a lot, to be honest with you, with these quote unquote over customized customers, is that at first they get very defensive because they don't want to get pushed. But once they can have a more relaxed conversation where they're more give and take about what their pain points are and what they want to go, they realize, crap, this is just going to be so much easier for me if I can do it that way, So
there's
able to take the coffee away? No. Okay, sorry.
So there's a related issue to that. They can't, some of them aren't going to change, some of them that need to change. Part of the reason they don't is because they either don't know what the art of the possible could be in the future. So Etling's example was a good one of explaining what is the art of the possible. But the other thing is, I think a lot of companies forget how much their organization and the external environment have changed since the time they originally implemented the Unit4 solutions.
Right.
They may have implemented an early Aggresso product line. And so I actually have a slide I use on public speaking things where I'm talking about big digital transformation projects. And I show here are reasons why some transformation projects fail or whatever, or get canceled. And I highlight 6 of them on there that happened to projects I was on. Not because I'm a bad leader of transformation projects, but like in one case, we had a great day at a client and on the remote site in California. And as we're heading back to the hotel, the CEO of this conglomerate personally calls me up to tell me that he just sold 40% of the company. They just finished signing the papers on it. So that kind of, let's just say, train wrecked the economics of the transformational project. So things happen. And I think a lot of stuff has happened in the time that people bought some of these products. And it's time to take a eyes wide open kind of look at, what should I be doing and what is possible?
Speaking of things happen, we already had our first podcast interruption with someone that wanted to break down the room. They wanted the coffee, Brian, but they can't have the coffee yet because we're not quite done yet. One of the things that I look forward to when you're at an event like this is I know you're going to raise your hand at some point. You're kind of like a tea kettle, like it takes a little while and then you start boiling. So I knew it was coming. And you had a couple doozy questions today. But one of them ties into something that I'm interested in, which is Unit4's vertical strategy, because I felt like we could have benefited from more of a vertical approach to their AI plans. I would have liked to see the advanced AI functionality they have planned on their roadmap with the vertical by vertical breakdown. But one of the challenges you had to them was around their AI roadmap. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about what you're looking for from vendors when it comes to this? Because I know you're going to be updating your piece on this topic. So
I kind of triggered something that got some of the other analysts to talk, and they had a chart that showed by horizontal function, like finance, HR, whatever, going down the page, if I remember it right. And then they showed what's going to happen in this year, 2025, and so forth, moving on down. They were given some examples of AI, capabilities they're going to release. And I told them that I thought some of that stuff from 2016 that they had there needs to get shoved all the way back up into what's left of 2024 even. And I heard another analyst or two kind of chirp up and saying they agreed with that, and I've seen, and I mentioned this to one of the Unit4 people afterwards, that there are some vendors just in HR alone that have released 70 different AI capabilities in that functional piece of their product. So the markets, I think the key lesson here is the market's definitely been moving a lot in this way. What I don't agree with a lot of vendors, they sprinkle this stuff in all over the place, but they haven't really made a connection between we added this capability to this part of this product, and yet we haven't really shown you what the economics of it are, the sustainability impact of it is, or we haven't even showed, explain which strategy a company might be embarking on and whether it works. For example, if I want to create a company that is a destination employer that people, will stay not only years longer than they otherwise would have, I'm going to focus not on AI, but I'm going to be focused on things like how do we find who are the best leaders and how do we develop them and everything else, which is a very different set of problems than applying AI to talent acquisition, for example.
Right. And I think what I'm looking for from vendors, and I didn't hear enough of this from pretty much any vendor this fall, I'm looking for three things. I want to go under the hood of the architecture, which I've been able to do, but I have to press vendors on it. I want to understand which LLMs are you using, how your customer data is moving. Are you using smaller models? What are you doing about log files? What are you doing about privacy? What are you doing about accuracy? I want to talk about that. I want to talk about costs and pricing, like you just brought up. But I also want to hear about the vertical AI, but in the context of how you see that industry changing going forward, because that's the fundamental issue, is that industries are changing for a lot of provocative and important reasons right now, and AI is one of them, but not the only one. So I want to hear about how industry is changing based on your expertise in that industry, and then how you're applying AI to help customers navigate that. And I think a roadmap that reflects that is interesting.
I think that's a killer point, and I think vendors could take a big lesson from the big, hugely successful professional services firms. They mostly go to market on a vertical flow, not on horizontals. They gave that up decades ago. And why is that? Because many functions like general ledger and accounts payable, whatever, have been automated repeatedly and consecutively to death. Many companies may be on like their fifth accounts payable system, for example. And you could find another 0.5% of efficiency gain by using AI to fix something in accounts payable. But that's not going to cut it. What we ought to be focusing on are the things that are going to make huge impacts in some of the more vertical and operational aspects of the company. That's the frontier we really should be exploring. And it shows, and I feel for vendors that mostly have, let's say, a horizontal solution set, they're rolling out AI and all they can talk about is productivity and efficiency savings. And I would agree, we got to get the hook back on the vertical side. That's where the real savings and the real money is.
Yeah. And I mean, you just look at a highly disrupted vertical like higher education, right? Where tuition costs, changes in student experience expectations, enrollment, diversity in your enrollment, scholarships, managing remote students, meal plan navigation with custom meals and all that stuff that students today care about. Like, AI can play a role in all of that, right? So I want to hear about all that stuff, right? And so to me, that's an area where Unit4, I think, can flesh out even more. And I'd like to hear more about partners in that area too, but I'll get to that in a sec. I did want to mention that we had a really good customer that came on. It was Glazer Pediatric AIDS Foundation, and they came on virtually. And that's always a good part of the analyst day when the customer is there. And I thought this customer was unusually candid, especially for like a virtual thing, which can feel pretty awkward. I thought they were pretty comfortable, and they were pretty open about like why they choose Unit4, but also what some of the challenges are around. And they've came back to change a lot. But one thing I'll mention about the customer is that one of the main reasons they chose Unit4 was because of the multi-currency capabilities, because this is a substantial nonprofit with a lot of geographical presence across regions. And I wanted to mention that because that's one of Unit4's sort of self-proclaimed like sweet spots in the market is these industries where there's more of some more like global multi-regional issues that companies are dealing with. So.
Yeah, early in my career, if I had a client who was doing the selection and they had operations more than a couple of countries, the short list of ERP or accounting vendors they would really want to seriously look at got real short real quick. And I always gave a, if you will, almost an advantage and recommended my clients look at the vendors from Western Europe, maybe from Australia and a few other places, because they themselves are used to dealing in multiple currencies every day in their software business. And it's one thing to say I can do multi-currency. It's another thing to really be a full-blown multi-country, multilingual, multi-everything, and to handle everything, including cross-country, intercompany transactions, the like. It's a different animal, and they definitely had that. And you look at again, back to the roots as with a lot of Scandinavian and Dutch kind of background, they were a Western Europe company, with deep foundation in that.
Any other thing that struck you from that customer interview?
Well, on the customer side, I want to give a very positive that there was a gentleman from Unit4 who was kind of facilitating the Q&A going back and forth. And thank God he didn't do what we keep getting at so many other conferences and analyst events, the highly scripted. So tell me, why did you choose the industry leading, blah, 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 and what were the 6 power capabilities that we brought to
and then after every answer, that's fantastic.
Oh, no, that's a good question.
Yeah. That's a great question. That's amazing.
Yeah, we didn't get any of that. I mean, and I got to tell you that made my frustration level go almost to zero. Which that's huge. I don't like infomercials on late night TV. I won't watch them, and I don't like them in an analyst event.
Yeah, I've seen you blow that gasket before, and you didn't today. So that's a tip of the cap to Unit4 right there, though we lose a little bit of entertainment value when you don't blow a gasket. So there is that. One thing that I thought was interesting around Unit4's narrative is I like what they're trying to do with this, whether it's self-driving ERP or whatever. I like their approach to flexible user experience and simplification and automation and all of that. But I wanted to hear more about taking advantage of it from a data and analytics and planning and strategy perspective, because that's part of it too. It's not just having a car that takes you where you want to go. It's the more quote unquote intelligent version of ERP where you're being presented with different roadmaps and different trip possibilities and, mileage warnings and all the things. And, hey, I want to run this scenario and that scenario. And so I'd like to hear more from Unit4 about that in the future, because I think what happens if you don't flesh that out is other analytics and planning vendors and AI vendors come knocking to your customers and say, oh yeah, we'll take Unit4's data and we'll help you crunch this and that, and we'll help you make better decisions, which is really what's at the heart of this. And so, but it was interesting to hear the customer talk about that, because that was actually one of the benefits they're starting to derive from Unit4, getting closer to a so-called single source of the truth where they can get a better window into their operation. So I actually think Unit4 is delivering on that to some extent. They just need to talk about it more. Anyways.
So this was a 6-hour event, basically, and they couldn't possibly cover everything that we'd all want to hear. And I want to make sure the listeners understand that.
Yeah. It's not like a 3-day event where you can really chase down your sessions and stuff.
I don't want don't ask me to help on the podcast for that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
But your point about the I dropped my thought. Sorry about
The
that.
analytics part.
Oh, the analytics.
Part,
Yeah. What I'd love to see the next event is some demonstration where they're bringing external databases to improve, let's say, a forecasting predictive capability. It could be an industry database or whatever, or macroeconomic kind of information. And that, I think, will really help bring analytical capabilities to the fore and will make that a much more compelling demo.
And they announced their digital assistant, Ava. And Brian, I almost called it a copilot. Thank God they're not calling it a copilot. I'm so sick of copilots, man. So that's another point for Unit 4. Because my whole thing with copilots is it's semantically incorrect, because I looked this up online. A copilot has to be able to land the plane. So I don't agree. I like the digital assistant terminology better. I think that's a better description of today's AI and how it can help people. But anyway, I'm not going to win that one. I'm going to lose that battle. But anyway, so anything about Ava?
Well, they had one previously, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking about that. It used to be called Wanda.
Right.
And
so Wanda got hit with the right sizing kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Only room for one AI assistant.
Wanda might have been ahead of its time. So in this case, Unit 4 was out there, out front.
Voice enabled, right? And it was voice enabled too.
Yeah. And it had some smarts behind it because it was trained up on some data. It couldn't do everything, but it was definitely interesting. But it's been supplanted by Ava, mostly because, part of it was they didn't get a lot of uptick on the product before. And like with many AI tools on the target market that Unit 4 has, which is, they'll tell you straight up, it's mid-market companies. But that mid-market's a broad area, and it could go from a couple of hundred employees to 10,000 employees. And on the high end, they'll probably be big users of it. I don't know about on the lower end of the market unless the stuff comes very pre-built, pre-canned, and pre-trained, so it can provide value that doesn't require a lot of personalization or customization for the customer.
I did appreciate that the Unit 4 didn't overdo it on the agentic AI front today. They talked about AI in the context of what they were trying to do, but I thought it was a good mix. Like some analysts pointed out, like you said, like beefier AI roadmap and more urgent AI roadmap. I get that, but I like that it wasn't like another AI day. We've had so many of those.
Yeah, I don't need any more of those. In fact, sadly, a lot of the AI days that we've had to go through, they're long on product roadmaps, short on demos, and even the demos aren't necessarily in production. I've yet to be in an event where they let the analysts actually sit down at a computer and self-drive, if you will,
interact with the assistant,
and find out what they can or can't do.
Yeah,
which I think is a very telling thing.
Yeah, it's felt more like an AI days, D-A-Z-E, than days, D-A-Y-S. So,
well, one of the things I thought we should touch on, Mike Etling brought up their M&A strategy, and I thought that was kind of interesting because we heard he's clearly got an interest in tuck-in deals, which are, for the listeners, those are smaller deals where you pick up some nice piece of technology at a very decent price. You're not worried about picking up, say, thousands and thousands of customers, and that you got to find something to do with them and convert them or whatever. So anyway, he mentioned two kinds of M&A strategies they have. One is the tuck-in kind of deal, which your listeners probably know as the go out and buy a small new entrepreneurial kind of tech company that's got lots of cool technology, not a lot of customers. If you have to, even you can recode it to your technical architecture and then cross-sell the daylights out of it to your larger install base. So that's not a surprise hearing that. What was a surprise was he mentioned that he's so bullish on the ERPX platform that he could conceivably buy another ERP company just to convert those customers off of an old on-premise platform to the ERPX platform. That I got to give him high marks for just having the guts to bring an idea like that to the table at an analyst meeting, because I haven't ever heard a vendor actually bring that up. I have heard vendors talk about doing a roll-up before, but nothing quite like this. So that was pretty, and it's a testimony to what management believes is the power behind their ERPX platform. So that was what made that newsworthy.
Cool. Well, let's get to our final sort of points as we wrap here. My final point is I think there's also a narrative around partners. There's a story to tell around bringing in some next generation partners and also just guiding current partners towards new business models. We discussed this some in the context that there are some partners, let's face it, their bread and butter is making money off customizing the hell out of ERP systems. And it was pretty good business for a long time, Brian. But you know what? Every now and then something goes the way of the old dodo bird. And I think that a lot of that business is depleting. And there's a need for a different kind of model that allows customers to build out cool stuff they need using extension toolkits and things like that, and not falling behind on all the new stuff and not getting that legacy spaghetti all the time. So it'll be interesting to see how they bring partners along in that model. So I'll be looking for more of that next year. And those are my main points I wanted to hit today. Do you have anything else?
Two little teeny tiny things. We were here with the one and only Holger Mueller. And of course, when you have all three of us, that means the event isn't just well attended or very well attended. Very well is with two. It was extremely well attended. Yeah. So shout out to Holger. And along with that, I do want to make a mention that John and I are already working on the unpredictions for 2025. And if anyone's got any candidates for things they'd like us to consider or include in, by all means, send it to us. We anxiously await any kind of feedback you guys want to send.
Right, indeed, because we're pretty good at picking out the quote unquote low-hanging fruit, Brian, but sometimes we need a boost of quantum blockchain-ready insights from our listeners for this. So please help us out on that front. And, we'll do that as we do every year. And I don't think Trenchant's going to make the buzzword generator.
Oh, I hope not. I hope not.
I think we've had just about enough Trenchant insights. But I do want to share one thing, though, which is that it's been a few years since we had one of these events with Unit4. And the biggest change that I think about from the last one is I saw a much more confident and coherent presentation. The last time we were able to put them back on their heels a couple of times on a couple of topics around adoption, around customer success. Today they kind of came out blazing on those topics and they were ready and they were ready with a good story around the migrations, which we could have easily gone awry with some tough questions, and they had anticipated those and how they planned it all. So, I see some progress here, and I think they're one of these interesting vendors because we spent a lot of time in the ERP market focused on a handful of giants. But a lot of times I think the interesting stuff is happening in the small and mid-market in ERP, especially with new approaches to industry. So I think they're going to be a fun company to watch. We shall see.
I would agree. This meeting was a different kind of Unit4 meeting than so many of them I've attended in the past, and it was a good meeting. It really was. So, John and I love to pick at things, and we always can find things to pick at.
We'll find some nits. Yeah, absolutely.
And then sometimes we get the compound problem where one of us spots something, the other one just starts realizes, it's time to chum the poor vendor here. But
a big part of that for me, and there's two reasons why I do that. One is that when we see those issues get raised by yourself, a couple of the analysts did a good job with their pesky questions also. The reaction is priceless for me. Not even the answer, but just the look on people's faces when they see those questions and how they respond to them. tells me a lot about their culture and their confidence serving their customers. And I want to see that gut check. So that's the big thing. But the other thing is I want to come back in a year or two. And of course, we're going to ask some of the same questions. And I want to see what progress there is, because no vendor has it all friggin' figured out. But when you see people saying, you know what, you guys raised a really important point last year, and here's what we did about it. That's what you want to see. And you want to see that from their customer feedback sessions as well. But when you put it all together, that's how you become successful, I think. So
I'm going to add to your comment there. You're right. They were, I don't want to say confident to the point of cocky, but you could tell they have been working to this point for a while, and they have been talking to customers and prospects and partners about these same kind of messages. So they were ready for a lot of the usual kind of, let's call them objections, whatever that we might throw out. On the other hand, they were also so well versed of each other's capabilities. Did you notice how many times somebody would go like, great question. I know, Johan's going to answer that
in the next, in 15 minutes or whatever.
Section. Yeah. So there was a lot of that going on. Now I know some of that's a time management deal, but it was really clear that these people, this wasn't the first time they've had to get together to talk these kind of issues, either with prospects or analysts, what have you. So that was really good. I always worry about the vendor where, this happens with me sometimes. I'll ask a question and the CEO jumps right up to go back up on the front of the room to answer the question for some other.
Right. And I don't like that so much, because that feels like a bailout to me. And, that's not what I want to see. I want to see people kind of in their own roles be able to finesse those things and say, yeah, here's what we're doing. And that's what we saw today. So good session.
Yeah.
Thanks for the debrief. This might be our last face-to-face in a little while, Brian. We're sort of finally on the end of our little fall tour, but we're going to have some month-in review shows coming up. So we'll pick this up virtually. So if you guys want to catch our video show, it's coming up on one of these Fridays. So it should be fun.
And I agree. I probably won't see you in person, till January, February, something like that. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, trust me, I'm not going to change between now and then.
Oh, no, you are not. All right. Bye, everyone.